5 days ago, Dr. Snyder called whatever condition my wife suffered from arthritis due to the presence of the typical symptoms. Stiffness in the fingers and knee joints, neck cramps, body aches, inability to grip even a pen without profuse shaking. As the days droned on, however, it was evident that this was not arthritis. I wish to God it was. The X-ray images Dr. Snyder handed me from across her desk confirmed the nightmarish fears that sprouted from the darkest depths of my imagination. Abnormal bone growths? Fusing of the joints? Strange branch-like projections? Never seen such a case before? As if in snapshots, I heard only vague pieces of the sentences uttered by Dr. Snyder. I was far too engrossed within the medical imagery showing the anatomy of my wife's body to listen properly. I apologized to Dr. Snyder and asked her to repeat her words even slower because I struggled to follow along. She nodded and then started explaining again, slowly guiding me through each image and interpreting the main findings. The first pattern throughout all the images was how all the bones were fused together into a singular, cohesive mass. The most distinct instance of this was how the separate bones of her rib cage had all melded together into a solid unit. Similarly, all the different joints connecting most of her bones had fused together. All bones had also notably elongated and thickened, stretching out the thin sheet of her skin to its limit. The final, most gruesome observation made was the shape of her bones. Her arms, hands, legs, and feet all shared the same unnatural appearance. The bones in her limbs were gnarled, abnormally twisted in different directions like vines. Her fingers and toes twisted and wove in between each other, tangled in a messy circuitry of bone. Dr. Snyder ended her consultation with me by admitting that she had never before seen anything like it. Apparently, my wife harbored a completely new condition never before recorded in the history of medicine. Though she promised she was tirelessly working with a medical team to research ways to find treatments for my wife's condition, she solemnly informed me of the high possibility that she would not make it. It's painful to admit I was not exactly surprised at her statement, considering how suddenly and rapidly Sophia's condition had deteriorated in the span of mere days. My wife had gone from a young, vibrant, healthy individual into someone who was permanently bound to her bed, screeching as her bones painfully and unnaturally contorted and grew beneath her skin. It struck me how quickly I had fought for the doctors to do everything to save her in the past, but now I had grimly accepted the inevitable possibility of her death. The least I could do was to be by Sophia's side for the remainder of her days. That very night, I did exactly that. I sat in a chair by Sophia's hospital bed, gently stroking the bony mess of her ruined, abnormally shaped hand. Her dull eyes were slightly open, staring in a zoned-out manner at the ceiling. I don't think she even noticed I was there. Her mind was simply too far gone to notice the details in her environment, including me. Every day, Sophia simply lay there like an unresponsive log, trapped within her pain. She barely slept either. The cocktail of drugs they pumped into her to try lulling her to sleep and ease her pain was not enough to help her truly find rest. Eventually, past midnight, after several hours of watching over her, Sophia muttered her first word to me in days. I could hardly believe it when a sound came out of her throat in a hoarse whisper. Richard. I inched over to her side, elated that she was finally speaking, even though it hurt to hear that it sounded like she was in pain from talking. As I glazed over her ghostly, gaunt face, she slowly opened her mouth as if to say something else, but the words were stuck in her throat. I hung patiently by her side, waiting for her to say what she needed. Suddenly, without warning, her mouth stretched taut and she screamed, a gut-wrenching, violent scream that scraped against my eardrums like sandpaper. I immediately clamped my ears shut with my hands, though the shrill, agonized screeching still found a way to burrow into my ears. That's when I heard the jarring noise of ripping, like paper being torn apart. Fissures snapped all across Sophia's body, as if her skin was forming cracks, before abruptly splitting apart at the seams. The skin around her arm tore open abruptly, and an elongated white, milky thing jutted out like a pillar. A bone, twisted and deformed in appearance. As the bone elongated, some flesh clung onto the bone before bits and pieces of it dropped to the floor in a pink and crimson mess of meat and clots of human tissue. Along with the main arm bone, her smaller finger bone sliced out of her skin, convoluted and tangled around each other like wires. Sophia's screams heightened in volume and grew more agonized as her bony ribcage suddenly burst through her chest. That's when I jumped back almost instinctively, my body recoiling from whatever was happening, though still watching with bulging eyes. By this stage, I heard a stampede of nurses enter the room, rushing to contain the situation, but all of them stopped dead in their tracks and stared blankly at the sight, unprepared to handle an event like this. More skin ripped off violently as the mass of bone tore my wife apart from the inside, lengthy bones jutting out of her arms and body like oversized thorns. Richard! My wife's voice startled me from my trance, and I snapped my eyes across to focus on her face instead of her body being torn apart. Richard, I love you. I love... Right before she repeated her final words, her mouth and lips were swiftly ripped apart by the multitude of bones that suddenly spiked from her skull and jaw, skewering the skin and flesh draped over it. A shower of blood spurted from the body like confetti, and dainty droplets landed on my face and clothing. My body shivered despite itself from the cold moistness of Sophia's blood that eventually soaked me. I didn't even have the time to digest what had happened. My wife's own death, because my vision was still assaulted by the horrifying transformation Sophia's body was undergoing even after she had died. The bones continued to grow haphazardly until the twisted mass eventually erupted completely out of Sophia's body, shedding her sack of marred skin and flesh off itself. After a few minutes stretched out into a gaping eternity, the transformation stopped, and the nurses and I stood and witnessed the final form her bones took. Glistening in the slivers of moonlight that streamed through the curtains was the silhouette of something bearing the uncanny resemblance of a tree, still dripping with fresh blood. Two gnarly main branches stretched out from the thick trunk, and projecting outwards from the main branches still was a tangled circuitry of smaller twig-like branches. A cold wave of dread washed over me as I recognized that the two main branches used to be Sophia's arms, and the twig-like branches used to be her fingers. The thickened, elongated trunk used to be my wife's abnormally shaped rib cage, fused to her legs. I finally noticed that the network of tree roots firmly planted within the mattress of the hospital bed were formerly my wife's dainty toes. I vomited right then and there. The contents of my churning stomach came tumbling out onto the floor until it felt like there was nothing left to heave anymore. I barely recall much of what happened after that. I think I tried standing up straight, though it felt like my spinning head would not balance on my body anymore. There was blurred movement in my vision, a rush of air whistling past my ears. My body crashed to the floor. Panicked voices of the nurses surrounded me. I let go of the moment, and finally my eyes gave up and shut. I had fainted, my body thankfully unable to keep me awake to lay witness to any more of the pure horror that had ravaged my vision. If anything, my brain had done me a favor by letting me sleep, if only for a while. When my eyes opened again, I found myself laying under the crisp white and blue sheets of a hospital bed. My vision was still bleary, but as my eyes refocused, I found someone sitting beside the bed. It took me some time for my exhausted brain to piece together the jumbled features of the face into one that I recognized. It was Dr. Snyder. "Hi," she said, her voice soothing and gentle, like falling flower petals, trying to make me feel at ease. As she gazed down at me with a small smile, I could see a certain emotion reflected in her dark eyes, and I slowly managed to put a finger on it. It was pity. Her voice cracked and cut off. "I'm sorry," she managed to breathe out. "About Sophia, the nurses told me what happened, and I came in and saw for myself." She drifted off after finishing her sentence, and her eyes became unseeing, misty and clouded over, as if she was recalling the memory of the milky white, bony tree that Sophia had morphed into. She snapped back to reality and brought her attention back to me. "Now, I'm not here to let you relive those horrific moments, because you need to rest and recover. I'm only here to personally check up on you until whatever time you feel is necessary to talk again, okay?" I managed a silent nod. Dr. Snyder stood up from her seat and looked me over, as if to inspect my condition one last time before leaving. Her roving eyes came to a stop midway through the inspection. As if something had caught her attention, her eyes grew bigger in their sockets, and her mouth stretched open slowly as if to gasp. Your hands," she mumbled. I craned my head down to look at my hand lying on the bed. I had not noticed it yet, but they were vibrating ever so slightly, shaking uncontrollably. Then there was the appearance, swollen around the joints, crooked, gnarled, and not straight. Swollen around the joints, crooked, and gnarled. A chill pricked my body as I made the familiar connection that they somewhat looked like tree branches. This has been It Was Supposed to Be Arthritis, written by wearing human skin. If you enjoyed this story, please check out more of this author's work at the link below, along with the original text. If you would like me to narrate one of your stories, please reach out to me on Reddit or go to my subreddit, rRemyReads. Please like and subscribe. It really does mean a lot to me. And if you'd be so kind, join me next week for another terrifying tale. Until then, have a horrifying week.